greeting. Then we went with everybody at the room where we had prepared all the prasadam. We had a buffet with all kind of very wonderful vegetarian dishes, and everybody took very, very happily. It was very nice. When Prabhupada saw this magnificent historical building, he was so astonished to see that he said, I didn't know that this kind of building still existed. And then when he came in, Prabhupada was just saying how beautiful the building was, because he was saying all this wood carving on the walls and all these Greek and Chinese vases and the big chandeliers on the ceilings, the furniture. It was very, very antique, all the draperies, you know, it was very luxurious, very, very beautiful. Yeah. So in one of these articles, one of the journalists who was there, he saw that when Prabhupada came in, all the devotees paid obeisances. So the way he reported it in the newspaper was that all these Hare Krishna devotees kissed the carpet where so many great personalities had been walking, like the General de Gaulle, like the Queen of England had walked on this carpet, and the devotees were kissing the carpet. I mean, it's true, you know, that to people who see us doing that, you know, they all interpret it in such funny ways. You know, it's so strange to them. For us, we don't even pay attention to it. It's so normal. But for them, it's really weird.
The brilliance and genius of Srila Prabhupada's mission was that he started off in such a humble way and always made himself accessible to people on all levels, so that moments like this in official government receptions or other elegant environments in no way should be interpreted as an aloofness or a sense of elitism on his part. They were nice to-dos when they could be arranged. It brought a certain notoriety or cachet to a visit. The really significant moments, however, were not receptions by fleeting politicians, but rather the in-depth philosophical meetings that Srila Prabhupada had, sometimes with very ordinary people.
When I invited him to come, a Christian priest, I explained him about monotheism in India, and he was very astonished, because most people think that Indian religion is only polytheist. So when he heard that there was also monotheism, only the worship of one God, he was very, very pleased. And then I explained him about how bhakti was the devotional part of the various schools of thoughts in India, and that it was so close to the Christian understanding of love of God. So he was very, very pleased. And when I invited him to come to Prabhupada, he said yes, he wanted to come. And this time when Prabhupada talked with him, he had a very nice and sweet and gentle talk with him, and not the heavy talks that he had sometimes, like for example when he was talking with the Cardinal Danielou. Then he talked also with a gentleman called Mr. Geoffroy. He was the founder of La Vie Claire, which means the clear life, the pure life, which was the first health food store, vegetarian health food store that we had in France. So this was a very, very wonderful personality. It was Prituputra who made him come. And Prabhupada had a very long talk with him about eating pure food. Mr. Geoffroy, of course, was explaining how they wanted to give very pure food in their stores. And Prabhupada, he wanted us to have a farm at that time. We didn't have it yet. We didn't have New Mayapur. So Prabhupada was telling him, so we will have honey in our farm, so we can bring our honey and you can sell it. And we will have milk, so you can also sell our milk. But Mr. Joffre was saying, yeah, but the problem is that it's going to be very polluted. And Prabhupada said, no, we're not going to use pesticides, so it's going to be pure. But the gentleman said, but even if the grass is pure, the air is impure, so it will go on being polluted. Then Prabhupada said, well, that's for the reason that it's impossible to have everything perfectly pure. So that's why we are offering everything we are eating to Krishna. That's the way to have things perfectly pure. Otherwise, it's impossible in this material world to have completely pure food. Yogeshwar had tried to get some people from politics to come see Prabhupada, and one of them agreed to come. He was called Mr. Mesma, and he was a senator. And what was very interesting is that Prabhupada, whenever he was talking, especially with Christians, but also with politicians, he always wanted to talk about not killing the cows, not killing animals. So they had a discussion, and Prabhupada was telling this gentleman that if you absolutely want to eat cows, then just wait until their natural death, and then you can eat them. And we were very surprised because it was the first time that we heard Prabhupada mentioning something like that. But he said, Prabhupada said, in that way you will always have meat to eat because there will always be cows dying and you don't have to kill them. So that was very surprising also to the gentleman, who certainly didn't put it in practice. But it was an interesting point that Prabhupada could consider, okay, if you absolutely want to eat meat, then do, but at least wait until their natural death.
I remember going on a morning walk around the Bois de Boulogne, in which there are some lakes, and I remember asking Prabhupada a question. I asked several questions, but one specific question was, Srila Prabhupada, what does it mean to be humble? And his answer was really incredible. He said, humility means that you're convinced beyond any doubt that there is nothing in this world, absolutely nothing in this world, not your money, not your family, not your fame, not your gun, not your education, nothing that will save you except the mercy of Krishna. He said, when you're convinced like this, then you're humble. And that explanation really impressed me. In other words, he was saying, when you depend completely on Krishna and no longer rely on any material thing or formula as a backup, you have no longer any backup, just the mercy of Krishna, then you'll actually be humble. So that was a wonderful explanation that he gave. And that stayed with me all these years, because that is actually the foundation of humility in Krishna consciousness. Now, obviously, Prabhupada was an example of that. I had made friends several years before with a lady who had a circle of friends that met regularly. She had a center for esoterical and interreligious dialogue. I had spoken at her center several times, so she and I had become very good friends. And it turns out that she was a personal friend of Cardinal Danielou, the chief cardinal of the Catholic Church of all of France. At that time, she was actually dying. And I went to see her, and I begged her if she would do a favor for me. And I told her that Srila Prabhupada was visiting, and he had been received by the city of Paris officially. And I begged her if she would please help us arrange a meeting with Cardinal Danielou, and she agreed.
Paris in these early 70s was a very political environment, and Cardinal Danielou fit right in. He was known as the Bohemian priest, he had a very strong following among young people, even though young people, for the most part, were very anti-religion. If anyone had an ability to circulate among them, it was Danielu. He managed to maintain a very broad-minded and open-minded position among young people. Danielu, in his own way, was making a contribution, I think, reaching out to young people who were completely atheist and attempting to bring some sense of the value of a God-focused life into their purview. Still, because it was a ritualistic Catholicism, he didn't appreciate, for example, the philosophy of the soul present in all life forms.
The devotees were amazed by the discussion because it showed that here is the top man in the Catholic Church, and he's an intellectual. He's not only a performer of rituals, but he's a top intellectual. And in the presence of Prabhupada, he was not able to discuss significantly the topic of compassion and nonviolence, and he was unable to comprehend the subject. And it made me realize why Srila Prabhupada agreed to meet such people. It was more for the devotees than any other reason, because we were able to see that although these were big people in French society or in society, they actually were very small in comparison with the pure devotee of Krishna. And that was important for the devotees to see.
I remember thinking when I was really early, why did my parents have to die? So that was already kind of in there. And then the Bible school and the Christians having fun things, and you'd go to that and spend a week, and they tell you stories about Jesus, and it always seemed very attractive to me. And then as I got older, I started going to churches with friends and different Protestant churches. We'd get to a point in the Sunday school, and I'd ask a question about, well, what happens to all those people that don't know anything about Jesus? You know, the Eskimos or the people in Africa or whatever. And they'd always come up with this idea that, well, no, I mean, to be saved, you have to know about Jesus. And it just didn't seem fair. And I'd like argue a little bit, and then I'd lose interest in that church. And eventually I ended up at the Catholic Church. And when I asked them that question, they said, well, you know, innocent people don't go to hell. There's purgatory or there's limbo, and we pray, and there's a process. And they can move up to heaven. And it seemed to make sense to me. And I thought, okay, that seems fair. And Shruti Rupa and I, by then, had kind of got also interested together. We had been friends since elementary school and lived down the street from each other. So she and I and my two sisters started going to catechism at the Catholic Church, and we did that for a while, and eventually my sisters and I got baptized. The Catholic nun, Sister Dominica, she encouraged me to go for confirmation. It's like the next step in the Catholic Church. You pass a slight little test, they ask you questions, and if you have any doubts, this is when your doubts would be cleared up, because you're going to go through this ceremony and you're going to take the Catholic faith as your faith. And if you fall away later, it's a more grave sin. It's a mortal sin, a stain on your soul that cannot be removed easily. So I was going to classes, and now I came up with a different question. What happens with my pets? Do my pets go to heaven? And it was totally sentimental on my part, because I wasn't a vegetarian, but I just wanted to know. And she was very sorry. You know, the nun kind of put her head down a little and said, no, animals don't have souls. Only people have souls, so only people go to heaven. And again, that just didn't seem fair to me. I mean, I was by then 12, and in the end, I went ahead and got confirmed, because I thought, well, I haven't found anything that makes more sense. And then life goes on, and adolescence comes in, and you get distracted, and you're a teenager, and so many things happen. And interestingly enough, Shruti and I remained good friends, and we would get into kind of other things together. You know, we'd talk about Siddhartha or just Eastern stuff in general. Not real deep, but just it was the hippie kind of thing to do. It was kind of cool. And At some point in all of that, I had made a type of commitment that if I hear the truth, I'll accept it. And around soon after that, I happened to see a TV show with the Hare Krishnas on it. It was a news thing, quick, from out of Miami, and that would have been local for Key West. But the thing that I remembered was the 4 regulative principles. And so I heard that, and I immediately kind of made a decision. I don't know if I want to find out too much more about this, because it might actually be the truth. And I just didn't really want to risk, you know, the 4 regulative principles seemed a little severe to me. And so I just didn't really want to know. And I kind of even almost made an effort to avoid the devotees. Once I saw devotees across the street, and I went to the other side of the street. And then, you know, a little time passes, and Shruti and I decided to take a trip to Europe. We were going to meet friends in Germany that were in the army and travel with them a little bit. And just before we left, somebody at the airport gave us the teachings of Lord Chaitanya and a BTG. And so we traveled. We, you know, really immediately realized after some difficulty and some ups and downs with our friends that we didn't really have too much in common with them. And we just traveled on our own a little bit. And then we just decided, why are we traveling all around? What are we looking for? We should just go back to our home and try and just be stable people. And so she gets the idea. She has this BTG. She says, why don't we go to the temple? And it was kind of a difficult trip to get to Paris. We had trouble with being vegetarians. So we got to Paris, and we got off at a train stop. And there were 2 quite large men that were selling there. And Shruti immediately went up to them and asked them directions to how to get to this address. And they kind of gave us instruction, and we started heading in that direction. And we realized that it didn't seem quite right. So we stopped and asked in a hotel. And that man told us we were going in a completely wrong direction. So we left the hotel, and we turned, and we started heading the way he told us to go. And then we realized that these fellows were following us. It could have been coincidental, but then when we changed directions, then they also still were following us. It was just a scary scene. We were kind of starting to walk faster and faster. They were walking faster and faster. We were hoping that at the end of this street, there was going to be the door with the number on it. So we see the 4 on the door. We start pounding on the door, and that's when the door swings open, and light just comes pouring out, and incense comes billowing out, and music comes out, the chanting comes out, and Indradumna, dressed in white, looking very angelic, says, yes, you know, can I help you with something? And we just said, we need help, we need to come in. And he said, sure, and he just lets us in, and he closes the door, and it was like, he closed out all this scary stuff on the other side, and everybody like looked up and smiled at us. And so he took us upstairs, and you know, he said, these girls just arrived. And Bhagavan was very friendly. You know, he came out and he said, oh, hello. And we talked for a little while. And we ended up staying up all night and working and being helpful. You know, we took showers and had something to eat. And then the next day was the Rath Yatra festival, so we went to the park, and there was a feast and a class and a nice kirtan. And I remember sitting there listening to that class. It was really sweet, and the philosophy was so clear. And I could just feel the tears coming out of the sides of my eyes, because I was thinking, this appears to be the truth. You know, I looked at Shruti, and she looked at me, and she just said, this is amazing. And, you know, I was agreeing. We were just like stunned. What did we stumble into? And Bhagavan walked around after that, and he asked us how we were doing. And we said, oh, okay. And he said, well, you know, our spiritual master's coming in a few weeks. Why don't you girls think about staying for a couple weeks, and then you could meet him? And he said, you know, you could help. We're trying to get ready. We need some sewing. We need some cleaning. We need painting. And we've got the new temple. And when we didn't look like we were jumping at the opportunity, he said, And you could always go sightseeing. You know, it's in Paris. You could go to the museums and stuff and then just do a little work during the day. And, you know, of course, we never went to any museums. We stayed, and pretty soon we were fully engaged doing things around the temple, all the usual things that have to be done. And I was sewing a lot. That's what I had done before I was a devotee. I was a seamstress. So I was sewing every day. And I did a lot of the sewing in Prabhupada's room, his asan, the curtains, and things like that. And I remember distinctly every day going in and praying, because I was kind of confused. I mean, these seemed like really nice people. And that's how I would pray. I just said, you know, these seem like really nice people, and they say this man who's coming is your servant. And I don't know if that's true or not. But in case he is, I would like to be a little bit helpful. And I would like to know if he is. So that was kind of the mood. And that went on for a few weeks. And then Srila Prabhupada did come. And you know, it's a flurry of excitement because he didn't come to France very often. So the devotees were really getting ready with programs and people to come see him, and you know, dignitaries.